Ever feel like you need a degree in rocket science just to understand what's going on with money these days?
Like trying to follow the stock market on a triple shot espresso,
Right,
you'd say.
exactly. And then you've got cryptocurrency, which sometimes feels like it's straight out of science fiction. But here's the thing, it's not going away. And more importantly, it's starting to look a lot more, well, normal.
Less like the Wild West, more like Main Street.
Exactly. And a lot of that has to do with big players like PayPal jumping into the game, which is what we're diving into today.
And they're not just dipping their toes in, they're practically doing cannonballs into the deep end of the pool.
Mm-hmm.
But to understand why this is such a big deal, we need to back up a bit and look at how we even got here.
Okay, so rewind time. Take us back to the beginning of PayPal's crypto journey.
So they started out back in 2020, offering the basics, buying, selling, holding crypto, that sort of thing. Pretty standard stuff by today's standards, right?
Yeah, makes sense. Start slow, test the waters, but then things start to get more interesting, right?
Exactly. They expanded those same features to business accounts, which got people thinking, okay, this is getting serious.
So, like, my local coffee shop could theoretically start accepting Bitcoin alongside credit cards.
Theoretically, yeah. But the real game changer, the thing that made everyone sit up and take notice, was when PayPal introduced external wallet transfers for crypto.
Okay, now you've officially lost me. What does that even mean? And why is it such a big deal?
Imagine this. You buy some Bitcoin on PayPal, but you're not stuck with keeping it on their platform. You can transfer it to a private wallet, one that you completely control. It's like the difference between renting a house and owning one.
Ah, okay, I'm starting to see where you're going with this. It's about giving people more control over their crypto.
Exactly. It's a huge vote of confidence in the technology, and it signals a major shift in how established financial institutions are approaching crypto. And this is where things get really interesting for businesses, which is something this article dives into in a really fascinating way.
Okay, so spill the tea. What's the big deal for businesses? Is it just about attracting those crypto-savvy customers?
That's definitely part of it, but it goes way deeper. Think about it. A small business, say an online artisan store, could suddenly sell their products globally because they accept Bitcoin. No more messing around with international transaction fees or fluctuating exchange rates. It levels the playing field in a way that we've never really seen before.
Okay, that makes sense. But the article also talks about this idea of diversifying assets, which sounds a lot like financial jargon to me.
It's really just a fancy way of saying don't put all your eggs in one basket. And in today's economy, that's more important than ever.
Especially with all the uncertainty in the world right now.
Exactly. And that's what makes what PayPal is doing so interesting. They're giving people more options, more flexibility, which is incredibly valuable in today's economic climate.
So more options sound great, but I have a feeling it's not all smooth sailing from here, right? I mean, the article mentions the SEC a lot, and it kind of feels like they're the big question mark hanging over all of this.
Yeah, the SEC, it's like they're the referees in this whole crypto game,
Yeah.
and they haven't quite figured out all the rules yet.
And to make matters more interesting, you've got Gary Gensler, the chair of the SEC, who seems to be everywhere these days talking about crypto.
He's become quite the lightning rod, hasn't he? But to be fair, the SEC's job is to protect investors and make sure the markets are fair, which is a lot harder than it sounds when you're dealing with something as new and disruptive as cryptocurrency.
Yeah, because this isn't your typical stock market, right? So where do they even begin to try to regulate this thing?
Well, the article really zeroes in on this whole debate about whether cryptocurrency should be classified as securities or commodities.
Okay, now you're speaking a language I definitely did not learn in school. Can you break that down for me? What's the difference and why does it even matter?
You got it. So think of a security like a share of stock. You buy a piece of a company, you become a partial owner, and you're hoping the value goes up.
Okay,
Right.
makes sense.
Commodities, on the other hand, are more like raw materials, things like gold, oil, soybeans, stuff with inherent value.
Okay, I see the distinction, but how do they decide which category crypto falls into?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And the SEC, especially under Gensler, has been arguing that a lot of these cryptocurrencies should actually be considered securities
And that matters
because securities are subject to a whole lot more regulations than commodities. And I mean a lot more.
so more paperwork, more hoops to jump through, more headaches for companies like PayPal if they want to stay on the right side of the law.
Exactly. And this is where things get really messy. The article even mentions the Ripple case, which, if you haven't heard of it, was a pretty big deal in the crypto world.
I vaguely remember something about it, but to be honest, I'm a little fuzzy on the details. What happened there?
Well, in a nutshell, the SEC sued Ripple Labs, which is the company behind the cryptocurrency XRP. They basically claimed that Ripple was selling XRP as an unregistered security, meaning they skipped a whole bunch of steps that you're supposed to take when you're selling securities to the public.
Okay, and this was a big deal because
It sent shockwaves through the entire crypto world because it showed that the SEC wasn't messing around. They were willing to take on some major players to make their point, even if it meant shaking things up.
so this whole thing is about more than just legal definitions. It's about who gets to control the future of crypto, whether it becomes this mainstream thing or stays kind of niche.
You hit the nail on the head.
Oh.
And that brings up another really important point that the article makes, one that I think often gets overlooked in all this talk about regulations and legal battles, the issue of trust.
Because PayPal may be a household name, but the crypto world doesn't exactly have the best track record when it comes to trust, does it? I mean,
Yeah.
you've got scams, security breaches. It can feel pretty risky out there.
And that's a huge barrier to entry for a lot of people, right?
Yeah.
They hear about all this potential and then all the horror stories, and they're hesitant to put their money into something they don't fully understand.
Especially when it feels like the Wild West out there. So is that where the SEC is supposed to come in, make it safer for the average person?
It's a tough balancing act because on one hand, having clear regulations could make the whole crypto space feel less risky, right? Like there are rules, there's oversight, there are consequences for bad actors.
Sure, that makes sense. But I can also see how too much regulation could stifle innovation, right?
Absolutely. Scare away the legitimate players, drive people towards those shadier corners of the market, and ironically, make the whole thing even riskier.
So it's a double-edged sword, this regulation thing. Too much or too little could end up hurting more than it helps. So what's the answer? How do we find that sweet spot?
That's the million-dollar question, and honestly, there's no easy answer. But one thing the article hinted at that I think is absolutely crucial here is education.
Okay, knowledge is power. Got it. But how do you actually make that happen on a large scale? This stuff can get pretty complicated.
It's a massive challenge, but I think companies like PayPal, as ironic as it sounds, could play a really interesting role here.
Wait, how so? I thought they were part of the problem, not the solution.
Hear me out. They have the name recognition, they have the resources, and now, with their crypto platform, they have a real incentive to educate their users.
So they could be the ones building the bridge between the complexity of crypto and making it understandable for everyday people.
Exactly. It's like, instead of just saying, hey, come swim in this pool, they could be offering swimming lessons, right? Making it less intimidating, more accessible.
I like that analogy because, it's funny. We always talk about crypto as this big disruptive force, right? It's going to revolutionize finance, topple the banks, all that jazz.
To your own bank, right? That's the big idea we hear all the time.
Exactly. And while that's all well and good, I feel like we sometimes forget about the smaller scale impact, the everyday ways this technology could change how we interact on a personal level.
Okay, now you're piquing my interest. What do you have in mind?
Well, think about it. What if instead of dealing with those clunky international wire transfers, sending money to family overseas was as easy and cheap as sending a text? Or imagine being able to directly support your favorite artists or content creators with micropayments, cutting out those middlemen platforms that take a huge cut.
Giving individuals more control, more autonomy. It's like you said earlier, this technology has the potential to be truly empowering.
It's pretty mind-blowing when you stop and really think about it. But okay, we've covered a lot of ground today. We've talked about PayPal's big moves, the SEC trying to wrangle this whole thing, the importance of trust, and making crypto less scary for the average person. So if you had to boil it all down, what's the one big takeaway you hope our listeners walk away with today?
That the crypto revolution, if you want to call it that, isn't just about money. It's about fundamentally changing how we think about systems, about challenging the status quo, and maybe most importantly, it's about asking what if. And sure, there are going to be bumps in the road, but the potential for positive change is huge. We just need to approach it all with a healthy mix of curiosity, a little bit of caution, and an open mind.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And you know what? Let's put this question out to our listeners. If you were advising PayPal right now, what would you tell them to focus on? How can they use their platform and their influence to make crypto less scary and more equitable for everyone?
Ooh, now that's a question I'd love to hear some answers to.
Right. So head over to our social media pages and let us know what you think. What advice would you give PayPal? Because this conversation is far from over. And who knows, your ideas might just spark the next big thing in the crypto world. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep with us.